And I found a conversation I read this morning between you and Mary J. Blige, where you said, long before I picked up a camera, I was deeply concerned with the ways in which African Americans were depicted. And for the most part, I didn't like what I saw. So one way of dealing with it was to step in and rethink how Black women, more specifically, need to be represented. That's been the guidepost. I'm always on that track. Can you tell us a little bit about this quote, and also, because it leads us to this dialogue you had for W Magazine with Mary J. Blige, which was really the beginning of what's happening now in Vienna?
Before I picked up a camera, I mean, I really understood something about the nature of representation. And in part, of course, I understood that because I grew up in the 50s. I grew up in the age of TV, what was on TV, what people looked like, how they were represented, how all kinds of people were represented. I mean, I'm not only really concerned with the way African Americans are represented. That matters to me, of course, but I'm really interested very much in the notion of representation, generally speaking. How are men presented in the world, and what does that tell us about then the expectations of men? How are women presented, and how are blondes presented next to brunettes? And how, right? I mean, there's this sort of deep level of these sort of notions of sort of, ideals about what is conveyed through media, through culture, through drama, through song, through TV, that really introduce us to a world, that for the most part is attempting and has historically attempted to shape our values around how we think of ourselves. I mean, it's a very deep and troubling aspect, I think, of sort of cultural production that we've all been involved in one way or another. And then, of course, I realized it for the most part, again, through television, initially, around these sort of notions of representation of the Black body, the Black subject, the sort of demoralization of the Black body, this constant disregard for the Black body, or a way in which the Black body simply operated, as an outlier, as a kind of echo onto notions of not just Blackness, but notions of whiteness, because it needed something to sort of pit itself against, at least in the construction of identity and construction of representation, right? And which I found, very perplexing and disturbing as a young person, because it didn't represent anything that I knew in the world around me. It didn't appear as my mother and father, my sisters and brothers, the people that I grew up with in my community. I mean, the stereotypes were so brutal. They were so brutal. They were so painful. I mean, they were meant, these images were sort of meant to really demoralize the Black subject. And they did their job quite well. So I really came to the work very early out of, I think, a greater sense of identity coming out of a very proud family, out of men and women who had a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of purpose. I mean, my family absolutely molded and shaped me in a very profound way in terms of how I represent and think about myself as a person and an artist and a woman in the world. So, of course, it was only natural as a woman, as I started to make photographs of others, that I would, of course, go against the status quo, since the status quo had so little to do with the authentic self, the authentic body, and whether that body is a Black body or a white body. I think, as you know, James Baldwin has so eloquently said that, and I agree with it, my sense of responsibility as an artist is to bear witness to the moment in which I live and to tease out what it means, and then to offer it and to share it with the public who has a right to know. And that if you do nothing else, that, you can grapple with the complex question, because essentially maybe I haven't answered the question. I've simply attempted to answer the question. I've simply attempted to offer other alternatives and, a counter narrative to the dominant narrative. Perhaps I've failed in some instances, I'm sure. And every once in a while, you sort of hit the nail on the head and it rings true in very powerful ways that are larger than you could have ever possibly imagined. So, but you keep trying. But that's the responsibility, I think, to mark it and to name it and to call it by its name, and to articulate it and to ask the difficult questions that most of us really don't want to ask ourselves.
For Vienna, for our next project, you actually decided to revisit this collaboration with Mary J. Blige. And it's a collaboration. I saw it first in the art issue of W magazine, where you actually met with Mary J. Blige in a 1920s building in Brooklyn, and a conversation was recorded, but also a series of photographs was made. Can you tell us a little bit about the dialogue with Mary J. Blige, how it began, and also how you're going to evolve it in Vienna in the context of the opera?
There was a commission by W magazine for me to photograph Solange. And so I started working on it right away, and we were in touch, and I sent her many things, and I did a lot of scouting and, determined that I was going to photograph her in this very particular way. And it became more and more complicated. It was just getting more and more complicated. And finally, I thought, I called her and I said, Solange, maybe we'll do it another time. Right? We'll just do it another time. And I called W, and W agreed that, was becoming a little bit more too problematic. And then we were supposed to shoot Oprah, right? That we would replace Solange and we would shoot Oprah. And who was also sort of amazing and brilliant in her own right. And I would fly out to California and cover Oprah. And it was interesting. And then suddenly I was on the phone with the great editor, Diana, at W. And she said, Mary, we'll do Mary, right? Because she'd also just finished, her first film, Muleboon. And we just thought it would be fantastic. And Mary, who was very sweet, very humble, very genuine, soft woman relative to this image that she has. It's a sort of bad rapper, She's a very sweet, lovely, lovely person. And she said, that she would call me at 6:00 on Sunday to discuss the idea. And at 6:00 on Sunday, my phone rang. Not at 6:15 or 6:05, but at 6:00. She was there and had some questions, but very simple. She really wanted to understand how she was going to be represented. Right? She really wanted to know how she was going to be represented. And I had thought about that as well, right? That on the one hand, we could sort of, represent her in relationship to the story of the film that had just come out, right? Or we could sort of go in the other direction. And so together, we really decided that we really wanted to go in the other direction, that the film would stand for what it was, but Mary was not that woman. Mary was not a downtrodden sister, right, living in the South, though she's from Savannah, Georgia. Her mother lives in Savannah, Georgia, in the Sea Islands, importantly. But Mary is a very careful woman concerned about how Black women are experienced and understood and what they look like. And so it was perfect. right? We came together. I'd sort of designed these sets that I thought were kind of wonderful and playful and beautiful and lush, and bringing in lots of other artifacts and objects by other artists and compressing them into the scene, and then just having her come in to be Queen Bee. I just thought it would be so fabulous. And so precious. And she's just, but always using this idea of reflection, right? So she's always looking at herself. She's always studying herself. She's always questioning her gaze. And she's always aware of the way in which she is, and sometimes being doubtful of how she's being represented and what she represents for the world. I mean, it was just like, like within the construction itself were all of these other kinds of ideas that were at play. It was so much fun. And I love working with her. And I love getting to know her after and maintaining a relationship with her.
And you also talk about the act of crowning. Actually, it's about giving it up. It's the act of recognition. And you basically wanted to participate in this crowning. You wanted to make a gift, homage, and you said also that it had actually to do about an image you have of the singer Dinah Washington.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that image of Dinah Washington and how it kind of connects to the crowning of Mary J. Blige?
Yes, I mean, yes, I used an image. I appropriated an image of Diana Washington, who was considered the queen of blues, the queen of jazz. That idea I thought was really important. And then, of course, there's John Basquiat's consistent use of the crown in relationship to jazz and music and African-American cultural utterance, expressive utterance. These ideas were there. I look at Basquiat almost every day. There's something on my computer of his. This idea is sort of the crowning moment, the crown jewel, the crown clown, right? There are all of these sort of ways, I think, of using it. But I think it's true that ultimately I wanted to make a gift to her, that I knew that she had gone through an extraordinary battle in her life, that she'd gone through extraordinary loss, that she lost people that were very important to her, including her first love of her life, that she had just gone through a very difficult divorce, and she'd come out on the other side of that. And so gifting her and recognizing, I think, her genius, her place in the cultural sphere, its importance, and the way it has impacted culture and music in particular. I thought that she deserved to be crowned, that she deserved to be anointed, as who she is, and a woman who has survived to tell her tale and to move on, I think, in a deep and complex way. And so, yeah, it's all been, Hans, it's been a deep struggle to make this work, and to know where many artists have had to go in order to make their work. There's an extraordinary richness in it all. Great stories, great lives, great names, great positions. There's all this richness, and my only hope as an artist is to bear witness to it and to bring it forward, and not without critique. Not without critique. I'm not interested in sort of like a positive story. right? I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in a complex story that allows for the humanness of the subject to pull through it all. And so if it is about humanizing, if it's about then making the corrective, building the counter narrative, so that the audience can question always its relationship to the subject profoundly, then I think that I've done my job. That if I can just get you to consider the question differently, and to ask the question perhaps differently, or to ponder it somehow differently, then I think that I'm on the right track of crawling towards our humanity together.
No, and it's an incredible work, and it's so, yeah, as you say, so incredibly serious. But what is fascinating is that you said actually in the conversation with Mary J. Blige, you also talked about the playfulness, and you say that actually within seriousness there is little room for play, but within play there is tremendous room for seriousness. And I think that's the power of this work, that within this very playful work there is so much seriousness.
Yes, thank you.